Hey guys, Donnie here at the Mar Group, eXp Realty, Memphis, Tennessee. And today we're going to talk about inspections and repairs on your home that you're purchasing. So stay tuned, check it out. Let's talk real estate. Home inspections. Wow, this is a big deal. Personally, I recommend that you get a home inspection probably 99% of the time when you buy a home. There's a few cases where I don't recommend a home inspection on a case-by-case basis. Most of the time, you need to get the home inspected, okay? You should use a licensed inspector. You should not use your uncle's grandpa who used to be a contractor. You should not use your mom or dad. Sorry, moms and dads, I know you're all well-intentioned, but our contract in Tennessee actually specifically says licensed inspector in order for your inspection contingency to be in full effect. And that is what I recommend, is an inspector who does it for a living and knows what the inspection is actually supposed to cover. That's number one. Number two, what is the inspection? The inspection is there to find major defects that are going to cost you a lot of money. They're there to protect you. They're kind of an insurance, so to speak. What they are not there is to bring houses up to code. Contract in Tennessee specifically says that. And they're not there for cosmetic issues. The carpet has a stain on it is not an inspection issue. Number one, you could see that when you walked through the house and looked at it before you offered to purchase it. So therefore you weren't surprised. You knew what you were getting. Number two, it does not affect the functionality or the investment in the house. So keep that in mind as well. Lastly, how important is the inspection in you making a decision of whether or not you should move forward? So after you get your inspection, in our contract, there's a couple options. You can accept the house in as-is condition, you could choose to withdraw from the contract, or you can request repairs based on that inspection. So when should you ask for repairs? When should you withdraw? Those obviously are the big questions. If it's in great shape, there's only a couple minor things. You may very well move forward with the home as is. Not a bad option. You got the inspection, you know what you're moving, what you're looking at, what you're getting into. It's not there to make the home new for you. Number two, and this is the big one, when should I withdraw? Because you can ask for repairs and then still withdraw if the seller doesn't agree, because we can't make the seller do those repairs you request. So withdrawing is the big one. At what point do I draw the line? And this is where I think people make a lot of mistakes. Really, unless it's a large repair, typically it isn't worth you withdrawing from the house for, and here's the reason why. The longer you're not invested, or the longer you're paying rent, or whatever the case is, it's typically costing you more money and opportunity or rent, or not having your kids in the school district you want them in, or whatever the case might be, than what that repair realistically is. Let me give you an example. I had a house that I listed for one of my clients. It's been 4 or 5 years now. I think we had that house under contract for about $75,000. Buyer did their inspection. Inspector convinced that buyer that it needed a roof. Now that's an opinion, so that's why I said the inspector convinced the buyer that it needed a roof. Buyer withdrew. The sellers couldn't put the roof on. They didn't have the money. It was only $3,000 or $4,000, but they weren't able to put that roof on that house at that time. And buyer withdrew. Well, a couple years down the road, not right away, but a couple years later, the seller did put a roof on the house. But here's what happened. In the meantime, the seller rented that house, and let's just say, I think that house had a market rent of about $1,200 a month, but let's just say $1,000 a month. In addition to that, we just recently sold the house for, I believe it was $183,000. So we'll round down to $180 and be conservative. So conservatively, the sellers made $108,000 on the price, plus another $50,000 in rent revenue. So basically $158,000 in revenue. They had a few expenses, but I guarantee you it wasn't $158,000. So even if we get real crazy and say their expenses were $50,000, I guarantee you they were nowhere near that. That buyer still missed out on $100,000 in revenue and price appreciation over a $3,000 roof. Now let me ask you, if I were to say, hey, I'll give you $3,000 today, you give me back $150,000 in 4 or 5 years, I'm betting you wouldn't take that deal, and I'm betting I absolutely would take that deal. In my opinion, it was a huge mistake for that buyer to back out of that purchase based on a $3,000 or $4,000 roof to give up $100,000 in return. So keep that in mind, especially on smaller repairs, because I've seen buyers back out over a $500 repair. If you're renting, guess what? 1 month, you lost your $500. don't pay $1,000 rent for an extra 3 months over a $500 repair. If you back out of that house, you have to start the process all over. So if it takes you another 30 days to find the house and then another 30 days to close on that house, you could be looking at 2 or 3 more months rent, possibly $1,500, $2,000 a month. The last thing I want to see you do is pay $6,000 more rent over a $500 repair. Your landlord that you're paying rent to, he'll probably love you for it, but I don't want to see you do that if I'm looking out for your best interest, okay? So let's talk about what are big items on repairs, on the inspection, things that maybe you should consider backing out for. It really comes down to your monetary value and what you can stomach. Ultimately, there's no right or wrong answer. What I will say that you should look for that I see that make buyers really nervous, roofs, as I just talked about that in that example, but even then, it probably costs the buyer more money to back out, a lot more money to back out based on the roof. A roof is a large expenditure. That's something you should be concerned about. Your mechanical systems, your HVAC, and your hot water heater. Those are things you should be concerned about. The last thing I want to do, it's like 400 million degrees in Memphis this year, is you buy a house and then next week the air conditioner breaks down. Because it's really hard to get people out there and repair it, maybe, possibly that could be a consideration for backing out of a home when it's 100 degrees. Even then, though, you know, if you got a really good realtor like myself, I've got somebody that's an HVAC technician that can get to you pretty fast. So that might be something to consider. A water heater is not a huge expense, but most of those right now are between $1,800 and $2,500 for an installation. So, you know, it's a good expense. Again, I wouldn't want to give up $150,000 over a $2,000 repair. And then, of course, there's a couple big ones that you've got to look for that are really expensive. Foundation issues. Now you're talking serious money. Water issues. There are other things that are major, but those are probably just the biggest off the top of my head to think of. And remember, there's always alternative ways to keep your deal together and get you in your dream home, even if you can't come to an agreement on inspections with the seller. For instance, you want the roof, the seller says, hey, the roof isn't that old, it's not leaking, I'm not putting a new roof on. Maybe you can work out a credit. I know the first house I ever sold, the inspector told my buyer that the roof had been put on incorrectly like 12 years before that. And my buyer kind of wanted a new roof, and we kind of came to the conclusion, if it hasn't leaked in 12 years, just because an inspector says something was done incorrectly, it's like a piece of flashing or something, let's not let that kill the deal. It hasn't leaked in 12 years, it's probably not going to start leaking tomorrow. What we were able to do, though, was get a credit. So my buyer said, you know what, I get it, I will take a credit. He was very happy, he got a credit. Seller was happy, they didn't have to put a roof on, we kept the deal together, we met their goals. And then a year or two down the road, a storm came through, and that buyer ended up getting a roof based on the storm ripping some of the shingles off anyway. So he ended up getting a credit to help him absorb his deductible for his roof, and then his insurance covered the roof. He came out in a great position. He turned around and resold that home a few years later and made great profit on it. Had he killed that deal over that roof, he would have lost out, because not only would he have gotten basically a free roof that added value to the house when he resold it, he would have missed out on all that appreciation. So there's a great example of ways that you can work things out even if repairs are not done. I highly encourage you, don't just jump to the conclusion emotionally that I think the seller should make it like a new house, that I think the seller should do this. Try to take the emotion out of it. Try to be logical. Obviously, everybody wants to buy a great home for their family. I will also tell you, no home is perfect. I'm building a brand new home. It's not going to be perfect. And no seller should be expected to take up the burden of making a 20 or 30-year-old home perfect for you because you got an inspection and you're buying it. Again, you should get a good home. There shouldn't be major issues, but there are some things there you need to be reasonable with as well, so that we come to a good end and everybody is able to meet their goals. I hope that helps you out. I know a lot of you out here looking at homes. I know a lot of you are looking at the expenses, especially these rising interest rates, and repairs can certainly play into that. But be reasonable, and most importantly, don't cost yourself to make a bad decision based on the emotion of a couple $100 repair. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Throw down in the comments maybe some things that are deal breakers for you on an inspection, like, hey, this would really scare me, I would consider backing out. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts as always. If you need anything, our information is in the description. Feel free to reach out. We're always happy to help.